Oh, good. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks to Stony Brook for having me here tonight, and special thanks to Andrew Lynch for getting the ball rolling and making this connection here. So it's great to be out east and to share a bit of what we've been working on out on the west coast of Canada these last few decades with you. So this is the region that we'll be exploring a bit over the next hour, and it's a place that has captivated our attention, certainly from a conservation perspective, and well, I guess it was about 1989 when we first had an opportunity to explore this part of the BC coast, and it was really largely unknown to the outside world, and there was very little conservation attention focused on this part of the coast of British Columbia at the time, and it was really meant to be a one-week expedition that's turned into 20-odd years of really exciting roller coaster of conservation challenges and opportunities, and I'll be discussing a bit of that with you this evening. But it's a big area, and the reason why we were pretty naive to think that this was an environmental campaign that we might be able to see some measurable outcomes in a short period of time. It was naive just because of the scale and scope of this coastline. It's half the Pacific coast of Canada. There's probably over 1,000 uninhabited islands along this archipelago. There's over 2,000 wild salmon streams. There's probably in excess of 20,000 miles of coastline if you add up all the fjords and inlets and whatnot. And so just the size and scale of this coast has taken many years of exploration, and I'm pretty convinced it would take many more lifetimes to fully explore it all. But we live, I think there's a pointer around here. So we live just up on this island right there. It's called Denny Island, small place. About 70 people live on it, and that's where we run a field station, and that's where we base our research out of, and where Karen and I raised our family, and we've been there for a bunch of years, and it's a remote part of the world, but a extremely beautiful one. We first went up to this part of the world to explore and inventory the rainforest. They were the most threatened and endangered at the time, and that was the main environmental threat. And so a lot of our early work was really focused on the terrestrial environment and the terrestrial world. And you know, to put, if you consider that temperate rainforests once extended all the way to Northern California, from Alaska all the way down the coast of Washington, Oregon, down to Northern California. And at that time, in the late 80s, the first watershed inventory maps showed that every single valley of consequence had been impacted by logging, eroding, mining, hydro, etc. And you only began to get into these intact clusters of rainforest river valleys when you got into the central and north coast of British Columbia. So even the southern part of British Columbia, Vancouver Island, these places had already been largely impacted. So the conservation opportunities for this part of the world were tremendous. And we really cut our teeth on developing conservation strategies and large conservation area designs for this area. And today we have achieved about 30 to 35% of the protection for the rainforest, which, you know, at the time seemed almost an impossible task given where industry and government were at in terms of what they would consider protecting. And so it took a lot of work, a lot of organizations, a lot of individuals, a lot of campaign work, a lot of research, science, convincing Fortune 500 companies to develop procurement policies to get away from sourcing old growth forest products from this region. There was a lot of different tactics and strategies to develop these conservation plans to where we are today. But while that's been going on for over about 20 years, what has really largely been overlooked is the marine world, and this has been a much larger focus for Pacific Wild in recent years, and it's also with this book Great Bear Wild has been more of a focus with our own photography and film work and whatnot as well. And it's remarkable because it's such an incredibly productive marine ecosystem. As I said, it's about half the size of the Pacific coast of Canada, and Canada has the longest coastline in the world, and yet we've only protected about 1% of our marine jurisdictional waters. So we rank among the last in developed countries in terms of marine protection. So this is clearly the frontier of conservation for the BC coast and our other coasts in the country, but this is our focus. So what I try to describe in this book, or what I hope the main themes that come out in it are largely of looking at the rainforest through an ocean lens and trying to understand this incredible interface between these two worlds. And in British Columbia, you have provincial government, like your state government, have jurisdiction over the terrestrial world, and then the federal government has jurisdiction over the marine environment. And so we sort of act like there's this actual defining line between these two ecosystems or worlds. And what we've certainly come to understand is that there really isn't any defining line, that this is sort of a seamless interchange of life that travels between these two worlds. It's just this constant interface of nutrients flowing from the terrestrial world into the ocean and vice versa. And we're seeing that through so many of the species that we've been studying, how terrestrial species are so reliant on the oceans and vice versa. And then another unique aspect, similar to the initial inventory work we did on watersheds and wild river valleys, where we would go to these places for the first time, and these are huge 100,000 hectare, a few 100,000 acre, large primary watersheds, completely intact, salmon producing systems, and each one of them, really so unique in terms of their ecological attributes and the species that they support, and really with almost their own culture and personality types. And so to generalize about these river valleys, it doesn't work because they are so unique. And the same with these offshore islands. As I said, there's maybe 1,000 uninhabited islands on this coast, most of them intact, pristine. And each one of these island systems support unique life. And a lot of them, such as this one, Princess Royal Island, and a lot of these very large ones, some of them supporting 70 or 80 different salmon streams on an individual island, to show you, just the size of some of these systems. But they also support unique wildlife, and many of them supporting black bear populations. And these are really genetically distinct black bears that separated from their continental kin about 360,000 years ago. So they've actually found a way to make a living on the BC coast, even through all of these amazing glacial epochs and huge glacial events. So a lot of this book was actually written on the sides of many of these salmon systems and on these islands, and it's really been a incredible experience to spend as much time as I have in these areas, because I always think about it like if you rented a car, say, and got on a plane, went to a foreign country and rented a car and went into a neighborhood and just parked it, a place you'd never been to before, and you just watched what happened over an hour or two, and then there was not much going on, and you just left the neighborhood and reported back that it's a pretty culturally impoverished neighborhood. But if you had just stayed a bit longer, you would have seen a school bus unload a bunch of kids, and the mailman walk by, and people walking their dogs, and you would have seen all of these things. And the next day, you would have seen probably these same actions repeat themselves. And you see a lot of that type of habitual activity in these wild river valleys and these offshore islands. And so I got an opportunity to spend a lot of time in this one particular creek, and after a day of watching this mother black bear come walking out on this log with her 3 cubs of the year, and then a couple hours later, another family of bears walking down this log and showing up pretty much at the exact same time, day after day, and after about a week of observation, of really just having patience and staying in this one system, having watched over maybe 30 different bears, many of them in family units, going to this one special spot that there was this natural bottleneck waterfall where salmon were leaping up the river, and this is where they were congregating to feed on salmon. And after a while, you realize that these are cycles that have played out for a long period of time. But the most incredible part of this, I think, we see this certainly with all bear populations, is just the immense loyalty that these cubs have for their mothers, and but also a lot of what we see probably in our own children, sort of this more delinquent side of being a cub, because of course this mother, she has to put 100% of her focus into watching the waterfall and hoping that when a salmon leaps up, she'll have an opportunity to catch it. And a salmon might only jump up every 15 minutes or so, but at the same time she has to put all of her attention into making sure her cubs are safe, because there's wolves in the area and cougars in the area. But after a few hours of watching their mother staring at the waterfall, these cubs, of course, are getting antsy, and they want to, go exploring and doing other things. And so, you can actually see the stress building with these poor mothers as they know they have to get enough fat to be able to survive over a long winter's hibernation. And this is such a critical time in the fall season, and the salmon will stop running soon, and yet their cubs are off wandering around. And if they miss an opportunity like this, there's all these bears lined up waiting for the favored fishing spot. And it's a pretty critical moment. But of course, I'm looking down at this waterfall, and you see the cubs are all wandering off, and they're climbing trees and getting stuck up trees, and they're wandering across the creeks and rivers, and they're bawling away, and it's putting a huge amount of stress on the poor mothers, because they want to protect the cubs, but they also got to feed on salmon. And this went on for like a week or so, and I thought, how is this possible? How these bears genetically evolved in this coastal ecosystem for over 300,000 years? It seems like they barely hold it together in just this 1 week of observation. But yet we know there's this old relationship on this coast, and there's ecologists that think that the reason that this bear is white, that there's this recessive gene found only in this coastal black bear population that allows for this pure white spirit bear, but that the bear has actually evolved a completely white coat to blend in with the sky, so it actually acts as camouflage, which increases their likelihood or efficiency rates at catching salmon. So, salmon have such a profound impact on the coastal environment. And again, it's this marine terrestrial interface that is so strong. But salmon have such a strong impact on the rainforest environment that they've actually turned the color of the bears there. But after about a week of watching this stress and seeing all these cubs running all around, it's like Christmas time, little black cubs and white cubs in all the trees, and they're all bawling, and mothers are all stressed out, and you're just wondering, how's this all going to end up? And then one day I walked up there and sit down underneath my tree, and I'm watching the whole scene down below, and you see all the mothers actually getting together in the forest, and you could tell that they were having a pretty serious conversation. And then the next thing you know, you see all of the cubs were put into this little alcove in the creek across the way, and they never moved from that spot for the rest of the salmon fishing season. This was their place, and you could tell they had been seriously reprimanded not to get into trouble, and then the mums would line up and catch fish for the rest of the season. And so you see these, it's really this almost cultural trait that wildlife have on these islands. And some islands are dominated by bears, by black bears. Some are dominated by other species. And this has been a real focus of our conservation work over the years, and something I've explored quite a bit in the book Great Bear Wild. So going further out towards the outer coast, towards the open ocean, you get into these even more rugged, wave-encased island systems. And so these are systems that aren't covered by lush rainforest as much as the inner islands just before the mainland, glacial-dominated systems. These are the islands that suffer the brunt of the open Pacific and the winter storms. They have very few salmon streams. So if you imagine that there are these populations of wolves living out in the Great Bear Rainforest area, the west coast of Canada, And they're, on a quiet night, they're practically within hearing distance of each other. And yet one population of wolves has a prey base of mountain goats and moose and deer and beaver and all kinds of large mammals that these outer coastal wolves have never even heard of, can't even imagine. And so what we've found by studying these outer coastal wolves, that they really are very much maritime, live very much a maritime existence. And they are successfully catching fish. They're successfully swimming to offshore seal and sea lion haulouts on a continual basis, preying on seals and pinnipeds. They are really living very much at the tide zone. So we're watching them digging for clams and turning over rocks for crabs. They're preying on river otters and other marine species. So it's just been a fascinating, entry point, not just into wolf ecology and wolf society, but also into the ocean environment where they make their living. They're walking these islands on a daily basis, searching for whale carcasses and other marine mammal carcasses that may be washing in. They think nothing of swimming across a few miles of open ocean on a daily basis. And when you analyze their diet, it's dominated by the marine world. And few people would consider wolves as having such a marine existence. It's recent sea lion kill, stellar sea lion. These wolves, fortunately, are also among some of the wildest wolves left in North America that have suffered the least amount of persecution. These wolves are genetically distinct, not so much that they contain genetic diversity, unlike other wolf populations, but more that they've harbored and safeguarded the genetic diversity that's been lost in wolves across North America that have been forced through these artificial bottlenecks, these genetic bottlenecks, because of the high level of mortality. So if you imagine, if somebody came to planet Earth and started eliminating 30 or 40 or 50% of the human population every single year for countless generations, we would soon, we would lose so many family groups and so many cultural and ecological genetic attributes that we find in the diversity of humans on planet Earth. And so the same has been with wolves. They've lost so much of their genetic diversity because of the high rates of mortality. But we find this historic level of genetic diversity in these coastal wolf populations. And partly it's because they have been able to live on these offshore islands and hide from colonization and the trapping and poisoning and government-sponsored kill programs that have decimated so many other wolf populations. And partly there's been a much more benign or tolerant attitude between humans and wolves in these coastal areas. First Nations have always had respect and reverence for wolves, and they've been a very important part of their culture. And so these wolves are a great entry point into studying the world they live in that has been largely unbroken. So I just took this video just a few days before coming out here. So it's just last week this wolf was out digging away for clams on a beach, and you're of course seeing the product of countless days of sitting around in the rain wondering, what the hell am I doing out here, and waiting for something to show up. And wolves in particular have been such a challenging species to study, especially with first-hand observation, because they're of course nocturnal. So just when the light is getting just dark enough where you can't see anymore, they're just waking up and getting ready for the night's hunt. And so the opportunities to observe wolves in the daytime is few and far between, but you can just see the wildness in these animals, and especially these island populations, the diversity even within the packs, because some of these islands are separated by miles and miles of open ocean, and so they're probably attracting individuals over a long period of time that come from very disparate parts of the coast. They're swimming across water, and then they get blown offshore and in strong current or wind or a storm, and end up miles away on one of these offshore islands where these incredible wolf packs are found. And it's also just a real privilege to be able to study animals that are tolerant of people as well, and don't see fear like so many of their continental kin do because of the way they have been treated. So even further out, these extreme windswept islands, such as this. You can see it's so rugged that not a single tree can even take root on these islands because of the storms, and these are incredibly important nesting bird islands and support huge populations of sea lions and elephant seals and a host of marine life. And the BC coast has a really sad history of interaction with the marine world. We had practically wiped out between the turn of the century and the 1960s, had completely extirpated humpback whales and fin whales and northern right whales and sei whales, and many species, including elephant seals, had been slaughtered. Many of our Coast Guard vessels had machine guns mounted on the bows, and they would go to these traditional haul-outs such as this and slaughter all the sea lions. And there was bounties placed on everything that thought was competition with salmon, everything from cutthroat trout to mergansers, and there was a very sad history for in the dark days of whaling and whatnot. But what we're finding now on the BC coast is this recovery and resurgence, and we're really bucking the trends in recovery and restoration that many other coastlines are seeing. And the question these days is, why are so many of these species returning? Stellar sea lions are now coming back to their traditional haul-outs, and humpback whales are returning in record numbers, and fin whales are returning for the first time in many decades. We're seeing them typically on a daily basis in many parts of the BC coast. And the question is, surely they're coming back because these are safer waters. They're not being, directly hunted. But it's also we're seeing a upsurge in marine productivity, unlike a lot of parts of west coast of the continental United States and even in Alaska. And we're benefiting from more cold water currents and some great ocean productivity, and that, of course, is increasing a lot of the life on the BC coast. And so we've actually got some great success stories happening, and there's probably been about an 80% decline in stellar sea lions on the coast of Alaska, where we're getting closer to historic highs on the BC coast. And so even though these two jurisdictions are side by side, there's very different situations going on in the marine world. And it's, diving with these guys is it's a lot of fun. It's like you just have to keep. I've got a grizzly bear and a stellar sea lion skull on my desk at home, and they're almost identical. These two species separated in evolutionary time frames quite recently, and so when you're diving with 50 or 60 of them, and they're, I don't know if you've ever left like a 6-pack of beer or something on a picnic table, and bears come by and bitten every single can, because they just really taste and feel with their mouths. It's just how they do things, and so they're not being like malicious and trying to open up every one of your beers. They just want to taste every one of them to see what's in there. And sea lions are the same way, so you're underwater and they're always just putting their jaw around your knee or over your head, and they're just kind of feeling it a little bit, but it's just, there's something just very wrong about that feeling. I don't think you'll ever quite get used to it, but mostly they're just playful. You got to just treat them like playful puppies under there, and they're forever curious and forever grabbing your camera gear and fins and everything else. Now, exploring it's been just such an incredible 20 or so years exploring, the terrestrial world, but trying to consider the scale and scope of the marine world, it's almost just impossible. Like there's so many things left studied and discovered. And just thinking about like the migrations that happen on planet Earth, and if I'd asked where I thought the great migrations were not long ago, I would have thought, it's the Serengeti, it's a wildebeest, it's a humpback whale migration from Mexico to the Bering Sea, or these great bird migrations, or salmon, or herring, or many other species. But in fact, when we go offshore and we're diving at night, and you drop down with bright lights along the continental shelf, and you're going down and you've got your lights on, and you're met by this massive wall of biomass that's rising from the deep mesopelagic zone. And we realize now that the greatest migration that actually happens on planet Earth is happening every single day in the depths of our oceans, and it's considered that anything that can swim is probably partaking in this migration. And the general idea is that this biomass of life, from plankton to larger species, are going down in the daytime to avoid predators largely, and then they rise at night. And some of these species are going down 3,000 and 4,000 feet every single day. And so it's like this giant heart that's beating once a day. It's actually so big and so profound that it's allowing for the oceans to breathe, and it's happening, every single day in every ocean on the planet. And it's just remarkable to see this alien life that, in the daytime, as it's descending, is often so thick it blocks any light that exists. So it feels like you're diving at night, and at night just to see it rising right up towards you, and it's just it's a spectacular migration to witness. As I said, we've only got about 1% of our marine waters protected, and our current federal government, if they have their way, probably won't want to increase any of that for about 30 or 40 years. And we just have one of the most negligent and intransigent government when it comes to protecting our waters. It's almost unconscionable when you consider the diversity that we have there. There's well in excess of 7,000 species that are found in the marine world on our coast, and albeit most of those, of course, 95% or so are invertebrates, but it's an incredibly diverse part of the world, and a spectacularly beautiful one, and one of the most unexplored regions on our planet. There's a giant octopus. I was diving with one of my colleagues, and he was doing some film work, and I was taking some pictures of these bat stars and urchins and whatnot, and I was really focused on trying to get this picture with the kelp in the forest, and then all of a sudden my regulator got pulled out of my mouth, and I thought, Tavish, what are you doing? This is kind of uncharacteristic, but a strange sense of humor, but I had to be Tavish, right? So I turned around, and of course it wasn't him, it was this octopus, and then before I know it, he's got my mask off, and he's pulling my tanks off, and he's pulling everything off, and but anyway, I managed to push him away, and he swam over to the bat stars, and I got this picture of him, so I was happy about that. So we are seeing this resurgence of life, and is it because these oceans are quiet? They're not, a lot of these acoustically sensitive species aren't having to communicate over the din of shipping traffic? Is it because of increase in ocean productivity? Is it because these waters are safe again, and these species aren't being hunted? These are great. This is a great success story that we're witnessing on the BC coast, but at the same time, so much of the impacts that we're also seeing are external. They're out of our control in many respects, and certainly acidification is one of them, and we're seeing these massive jellyfish blooms happening and coming into our coast. Some of them have just been absolutely remarkable up and down the entire coast and offshore as far as you can sail, solid jellyfish, and this is certainly an indication of a grave imbalance in our marine ecosystem. If you consider that this is a species that has spent the last 600 million years evolving to exploit imbalances in the marine world, And, and what a great job it does. This is a species that doesn't have a heart, doesn't have a brain, yet it can eat and prey on species that are smarter, faster, larger than they are. And we're seeing an unprecedented amount of them on the BC coast. And I think that jellyfish are one species that anyone involved in the marine world or the plight of our oceans, it's going to be one of the biggest topics of concern in coming years. There's also just all these seasons, and you think we often consider that we have 4 seasons. It seems like on the coast of BC there's hundreds of seasons, and some of them are just so refined and elegant and short-lived. They might only last a week or two, but a lot of these seasons involve the reproduction cycles of forage fish like ooligans, and in this case herring has become a really important focus for our conservation work on the BC coast, and they truly are a foundation species. They support so many, and they at this time of year they're just coming in from the deep water and rising to the shallows, and they're being followed by humpback whales and white-sided dolphins, and they're coming in and measured in the thousands and thousands of tons, and just a couple of weeks from now at some amazing timing that they somehow communicate between themselves, and a lot of it I'm sure has to do with salinity and ocean temperature and the lunar cycle and tides and so many other factors that we're still beginning to understand. You'll look off into one little rocky shoal on the outer coast, and you'll see it suddenly start to turn milt from the sperm of thousands of males discharging sperm, and then the females are all coming inshore and they're depositing their eggs and hoping that they're going to get fertilized. But there's so many herring doing this that the ocean, as far as your eye can see, suddenly completely turns this bright white milk color. And it's, of course, bringing all of the deep sea denizens like rockfish to the surface to feed on these eggs. And it's just such an incredible cycle because of how short-lived it is. At one moment, the coast is quiet, you can barely hear a seagull, and the next minute you're seeing the sperm of thousands of tons of herring going all up and down these inlets and shores, and then as the tide drops, you're looking at 100 miles of coastline that is solid herring eggs from the edge of the cedar boughs to 100 feet below the tide line as inches of thick white little herring eggs. And for any of you anyone that enjoys caviar, this is as good as it gets. We just reach down and grab a fistful of them and eat them with the seaweed right there, and it's just absolutely delectable. And it's got to be one of the most delicious things that I've ever eaten from the ocean, and that's certainly not lost on a lot of other species. And so we're seeing black bears that are coming out of the forest on the same day in 5 years. On the same day, at the same time, for over 5 years to feed on these herring eggs. And so again, this is this ancient, old relationship between the ocean and the rainforest, and it's seen through the eyes of bears. And they're feasting on these eggs every day. And imagine if you've been sleeping all winter, what an incredible food supply that is to suddenly have at your disposal. It's like a massive buffet of caviar that is exposed at every low tide, and we're seeing it with packs of wolves that emerge out of the rainforest to feast on these herring eggs. And of course, they've been doing this for countless generations, probably thousands and thousands of years. And again, there's no deer kicking them in the head or sea lions biting them. This is again a highly nutritious, safe, secure food supply that these wolves are eating. And I think this is again a part of what I was hoping to achieve with this Great Bear Wild book, and is certainly a common theme in all of our conservation projects and research and whatnot on the coast, is this bridging these two worlds, and to be able to do it through a species like wolves is great. And I always thought, what an opportunity to be able to take a picture maybe from under the water, looking up through the ocean lens into the rainforest, and to have wolves in the middle feasting on herring eggs. And I've been talking about this idea with my colleagues at Pacific Wild for quite a while, thinking, well, that'd be a tough picture, and muttering away about it. And then one day, I think they got tired of me talking about it, and they threw me in the water and threw my camera in afterwards. And I thought, well, I got to go swim over and give this a try with these wolves that are feeding on the herring eggs. And so I actually dove down, and I was looking up, and I could see the wolves with their feet in the water. And I thought, I'm just going to have one chance to get up there, probably get one click of the camera to get this picture I was thinking of, and before they go running off into the forest, and then that would be the end of it. And so I got up there, and I see his feet, and I just start rising up, and I just start poking my head out of the water, and just to get kind of the split picture between the rainforest and the ocean with the wolf right there. And then I immediately realized that this wasn't really working out, because the wolves all just looked over at me, and you could just hear them saying, this is the stupidest seal that we've ever come across. And then they come running over, and one of them's chewing on my snorkel and grabbing. But I managed to get a few pictures, so it was pretty fun. The timing is not coincidental. Like, if you imagine all the countless shorebirds coming from Central and South America that are half starving because they've just flown 3,000 or 4,000 miles, and then they can just land on a outer coastal beach on the coast of BC, midway between their nesting grounds in the north and their wintering grounds in the south, and they can feast on these herring eggs. And what a gift for them. And it's probably the difference between life and death in terms of their breeding success. And that you just see how many eggs these guys are eating. This isn't fast forward. They're actually gorging so much. They're feasting so much on these eggs that they actually I was watching them, and sometimes there'll be 5,000, 10,000 surf birds and black turnstones, and you can't even hear yourself talk because it's so loud from all their twittering, and they've feasted on so many eggs. They've actually gorged on so many that a big wind picked up and hit this one rocky beach where they were all feeding like this, and they all fell right over, and they're just the little yellow legs flapping away up above, and they could barely even get back on their feet again. But again, what a tremendous gift for these countless birds. And there's some recent research paper that was just put out by Simon Fraser University and some other universities that showed that by analyzing about 171 different village sites or midden sites on the west coast from Alaska to California, they found that herring was actually the dominant species throughout a 10,000-year time frame, even more so than salmon. So herring has actually been more of an abundant food source and a foundation, not just for the coast, but for First Nations people over a very long period of time. And it's only since the industrial fleets and the rendering plants at the turn of the century do we see the first declines in herring over a 10,000-year period. And so First Nations people have been suffering from the decline of herring, and of course it's caused because of government mismanagement and overfishing. And herring are unique because they can spawn multiple times, maybe 8 to 10 different times if they're allowed. But the industrial kill fishery scoops up all the herring, like you see here in a seine net, and the herring, of course, are killed. The roe is extracted, sent to Asia, and the rest of it's ground up for fish meal and garden fertilizer and that kind of thing. So a completely unsustainable fishery, and one that we've been working and campaigning on trying to stop in favor of sustainable fisheries that collect the eggs but allow the herring to continue to survive. I'll get back to this picture. But as I said, we've got some great success stories, and we're not hearing a lot of great success stories in the world's oceans these days. But when we first started doing research on the BC coast, humpback whales were rare to almost non-existent. Today, there's about 350 to 400 humpback whales that are returning every year to our near inshore waters. And so people are wondering, why are they returning? They're returning in numbers, not just because of their natural reproductive rate, but individuals are deciding to consciously come to this part of the coast. And it's a fascinating part of our work is to try to understand why. Is it because, again, are other oceans less productive with less food, less forage fish, less krill? Is it maybe because these are one of the last quiet oceans where acoustically sensitive marine mammals such as humpback whales can still communicate. And it's an incredible experience to have. This picture I just took in fall, just a couple of humpback whales sleeping at the surface. And there's so many whales now returning to these fjords and inlets, especially around Camano Sound and the central part of the Great Bear Rainforest area, that on a quiet, still day, you can wake up in the morning and you can count 100 sleeping humpback whales scattered all throughout the inlet. And it's, you know, on this particular day, it was so calm, and it was like that heavy kind of coastal fog was there, and that there was an actual haze across the top of the water that was the breath of whales, and the entire cabin of our sailboat was encased in whale breath. And I know it sounds really lovely and romantic, but it actually stinks like hell. But it gives you a glimpse of, you know, what this ocean was once like, and the potential for it to become again. Fin whales, the second largest animal ever to have inhabited planet Earth, are now commonplace in parts of the BC coast. They're returning in numbers that was unimaginable not many years ago. So a lot of our work is around acoustics. We're operating the largest hydrophone network on the BC coast now, and we're monitoring and collecting data 24 hours a day, 365 days a year with this array of hydrophones. We've got an incredible team of technicians and ecologists and biologists and mariners that we work with at Pacific Wild who have been building these stations and collecting this data. And what we're trying to do is understand, you know, what is the acoustic environment like now, and why is it supporting such large diversity and abundance of species? And the idea is that if we can figure out what the acoustic signature is like today, then we can propose acoustic thresholds in anticipation of increased shipping traffic on the BC coast. So it's hard probably for you to imagine the scale of that, but that's about 30,000 square miles of coastline and land, and that's the reach that our hydrophones currently have. And these are all wireless, transmitted wirelessly through some really rugged terrain. It's all alternative energy, solar powered, and we've also been coupling some of our underwater hydrophones with high definition, fully controlled, remote controlled, pan tilt zoom underwater cameras to get a better sense of what we're actually listening to. And this is all transmitted wirelessly, and we've got some cameras that are transmitting wirelessly over 40 and 50 mile distances. So it's incredible technology to be using to better understand the marine environment, and all of these hydrophone signals and remote video signals and cameras are all sent back to our field lab, where it's all collected and stored and then disseminated to different universities and academics around the world. Well, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we got involved in this conservation issue largely because of the endangered rainforest, and we never imagined today that we'd be dealing with so many non-timber related issues, but almost all energy focused. And the Great Bear Rainforest area is in the unfortunate position of being right between smack dab in the middle of what's considered the second or third largest known recoverable oil and gas reserves in the world, and Asia. And the Canadian federal government is hell-bent on building as many pipelines as it possibly can to the rainforest, where terminals would be built for offshore oil and gas export. And you know, this is why this resurgence of life and begin this understanding of the importance of the acoustic world comes at almost such an ironic time, because you know, these are some of the largest oil and gas expansion plans that on the planet. And if you consider all of the proposals that are currently on the table right now for condensate, which would come from across the Pacific, which is then sent by pipe to Alberta, and it's injected into pipelines to allow the thick bitumen or tar sands crude to flow easier in a pipeline. And then you add the gas. There's about 12 different gas proposals right now, which many of them involve liquefaction terminals on the coast. And then there's oil sands or tar sands pipeline proposals coming from Alberta. If you add up all of them, it would facilitate about 3,000 separate tanker trips a year through waters that currently don't have a single tanker through them. So this is a significant issue, not just for people on the coast where we come from, but it's the topic of conversation across Canada. And I know that you folks are mostly embroiled in the Keystone pipeline, but and I don't know how much you've heard about the West Coast pipelines, but it's been a real focus for us. It seems like, you know, we've made such progress in protecting the rainforest and bringing attention to the area, and now we're set with, you know, just almost these unimaginable threats. And I don't think we've ever seen such a really a David and Goliath battle playing out in such a remote area as perhaps we are in this area. This is Hartley Bay. It's home of the Gitgat First Nation. It's only about 160 people that live here. And they've been, you know, got 10,000 years of history in this one traditional territory. And they're right on the tanker route. And so, you know, their way of life would just be altered in unimaginable ways. But they're having to really lead the fight on these energy issues, because we just don't enjoy the types of protective measures that you do in the United States, such as your endangered species legislation and forest practices and forest codes and many other protective measures, Clean Water Act, et cetera. You know, we just don't have any of that in Canada. It's very much the Wild West. So, you know, we couldn't even take industry or government to court, and we have very few political measures or recourse to further environmental protection, and so that's why you know, we have to get really creative in how we further environmental protection. But probably the greatest hope we have is Indigenous people. You know, our Constitution still recognizes rights and title and is still backed by the Supreme Court of Canada. And so the fact that many of these Indigenous groups are fighting for their way of life probably gives our oceans and lands our greatest hope in the future. And but again, it's, you know, if you imagine you're 160 people strong and you're fighting every single oil company in the world, every single gas company in the world, because they're all invested. There's not a single player in the oil industry that's not heavily invested in the Alberta oil sands, and they all want access to tidewater, and that puts us right in the middle of this really this Herculean battle. This is a remote on Princess Royal Island, a remote halibut and seaweed gathering camp, and these are two elders from Hartley Bay that. The late Margaret Reese, the woman in the foreground there, she's been going to this remote camp with, you know, it's a dirt floor where they preserve halibut in the wind and dry it in the wind, and they dry seaweed on the rocks. And she's been going there at this time, when I took this picture, for 93 years. It never missed a year, and it was just an incredibly important part of their life. And you know, when you sit down at the table and you're talking to them, they're so concerned because if an oil tanker came by, you know, they have to collect their seaweed at low tide, and the elders in the community are the ones that are collecting most of the seaweed, and they know they'd be washed right off of the beaches by the wake of these vessels. And you know, there's just countless other reasons why they're opposed to these oil tankers. This is the scene of the Queen of the North, the flagship ferry that run by the provincial and federal government in Canada, and it ran into Gill Island in the same area where these tankers are proposed to go. And the point of this is just that, you know, the mitigation is just impossible for human error, and you know, we can expect that there will be an Exxon Valdez type spill in these waters at some time if these proposals you know, did go ahead. So we've been really very involved in this issue over the last 5 years. In particular, it's gone through the National Energy Board and the Joint Review Panel hearings, and you know, we've been trying to you know, persuade government and industry around the importance of these returning whales. And these are threatened populations of whales that are returning to these very same waters, and that the likelihood of ship strikes and acoustic pollution and acoustic masking, you know, would disrupt these whales. And the ship strike issue is a very real one. And the response from Enbridge, the proponent of the pipelines, said, well, they're just going to put spotters on the front of these tankers, and that they'll maneuver around the sleeping whales and the whales that they find there. But these are, of course, narrow, confined passageways, and you can imagine how ludicrous it would be to actually navigate around a sleeping whale. But it's the big issue happening out on the West Coast, and it's our view that this is a finite resource. This is a resource that we should be using strategically towards a different energy future. This isn't something that we should be investing so many tens of billions of dollars in pipeline and refineries and terminals to keep us pumping oil to Asia for the next 40 or 50 years. It clearly isn't in the best interest of this planet or the people that live on the coast, and it's very much front and center in all of our research and marine and terrestrial conservation work, and something that is going to dominate our attention in the coming years, because these approvals have just been given for a number of these pipelines, and it's very much the single biggest threat for this part of the coast. So I think I'm going to end there, and I appreciate your patience, and I'd like to, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer any. So thank you. Yeah. All right, thanks. Any questions? Yes.
You mentioned that your main support, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, comes from the First Nations. Is there public relations work going on throughout Canada? Does public opinion affect the Canadian government when they make these decisions?
Public opinion is, certainly a critical part of this, and I don't think we'd be so far ahead as we are right now in terms of at least delaying or stopping some of these proposals. It's because it's just political suicide for certain political parties, both federally and provincially, to support these. So public opinion is a critical issue, and the overwhelming majority of Canadians are not supportive of moving heavy oil through the rainforest. This pipeline it'd be a 1,000-mile long pipeline that would cross 1,000 different streams and creeks, including two of the largest salmon rivers in the world, the Fraser and the Skeena. The cost to this whole ocean environment, and there's whether you look at it from a cultural or ecological or economic perspective, there's just so many compelling arguments to not support it. And so, public opinion is critical, and there would probably be shovels in the ground right now, and these pipelines would be being built if public sentiment in opposition wasn't as strong as it is today. But when it comes to actual legal recourse, First Nations certainly have the strongest role to play there. Yes?
Are there approaches or tactics that you can take from your success with the logging companies that can be applied to the oil and gas industry, or is it?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. When I think back 20 years ago, I remember we were thinking, oh my God, we've got every major logging company in British Columbia that we're going up against, and timber is king in our economy at that time, and it just seems so overwhelming. But when I look back on that, dealing with logging companies was like playing in a sandbox, because now we're dealing with every single major oil company in the world, and it's not just every single oil company that want these pipelines, but these are state-backed companies like Petronas and Sinopec, and you've got the weight of the Chinese government and the Malaysian government behind these state-owned oil companies that are all heavily invested in oil and gas in British Columbia and Alberta. So, I don't think that planet Earth has ever seen, such a powerful force such as that. And, what we've learned in our successes in other issues, we've successfully kept open net cage salmon farms out of the Great Bear Rainforest area. It was a big international campaign. We've successfully transformed forest practices and protected large areas. I think that the reason we were successful is because of international condemnation, international scrutiny, procurement policies through companies, but it's really international pressure that has helped, and I think that is probably the thing we've learned that has the greatest application for this issue. And as more people find out about how Canada's been going down this road of this petrostate mentality, and how the rise and fall of the price of oil, our dollar is rising and falling with that, and we've somehow, I think without most Canadians understanding it, we have become very much a petrostate where the price of oil it is ruling our democracy and our economy and ruling our current federal government. It's quite incredible how oil is suddenly, unbeknownst to most of the populace, is running our country. Yes?
If the Keystone XL is not built, does that provide more impetus to build the pipelines out to the west? And if the Keystone is built, does it take some of the pressure?
Yeah, well, it's an excellent question. It's something that everyone ponders, and it's, I don't have a clear answer for that. There are so many variables between pipeline politics in North America, and it's not just Keystone. There's a proposal for vast expansion of the Kinder Morgan pipeline that is currently going down to Vancouver right now. There's proposals to send oil to the Mackenzie Delta. There's proposals now to build pipelines to Alaska to join with North Slope crude oil. There's proposals for reversing the eastern pipelines. There's a lot of things at play, and then nobody imagined that the U.S. would be producing as much energy, much oil and gas as it is today as well. So there's a lot of things at play. I think some people say, yeah, if Keystone was approved, it would take pressure off of the West Coast pipelines, and some say that if it is formally rejected or delayed indefinitely, that it will increase pressure to build those pipelines. I'm not sure if it's the case. Either way, I think there's a lot of other variables. The fact is the federal government wants to expand tar sands production dramatically, and if they did have their way, it would necessitate multiple pipelines or vast increase of oil on rail. So it's a good question, something a lot of people ponder and wonder, but there's a lot of variables at play I think for a clear answer. Yes?
I'll ask another question. Biologically, of course, you're bordered on north and south by the U.S., and we know that animals and ecosystems don't care about political boundaries. So, in your work, is there any interaction with the U.S. government either on the conservation part to protect these ecosystems or in the political arena in terms of deciding about building pipelines and that?
So do you mean is there more transboundary support, or?
Right. I mean, is the U.S. government either in Alaska or its states in Alaska or the U.S. south of you or the U.S. federal government? I mean, is there any role that the U.S. is playing, either supporting the Canadian? I'm very ignorant.
Well, it's another good question. I think there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than we realize. I mean, think about it. Like, if we really do have the second or third largest known recoverable oil reserves in the world, and it's right here in North America, is that in America's interest to see that being shipped to Shanghai and overseas? Wouldn't it make strategic sense that this would be contained and maintained in North America? I would think that the U.S. would find a way to ensure that those pipelines aren't built. I think, there's a lot of saber rattling and a lot of, positioning between the Canadian and the U.S. governments over these pipelines. But at the end of the day, I think getting back maybe to answering your question, the most important thing is that we know that this oil, this tar sands oil in Alberta, is among the dirtiest in the world in terms of emissions. And it's not in anyone's interest on the planet to increase production of it. And what we should be doing is getting to the source. So we shouldn't be debating every single pipeline proposal that comes up, but we really should be saying, do we want to be mining this oil and polluting this planet to this extent, and get back to the real root of the issue. And I think that if more North Americans get focused on, what is the biggest source of pollution on the planet today, which is the tar sands oil production, that hopefully that would negate, construction of all these new pipelines. And that's really where the debate should be, because you can cut off the tentacles of the oil by stopping various pipelines, but at the end of the day, if production continues to increase, it's going to be the end of this planet. I mean, it's just going to exacerbate runaway climate change in unimaginable ways. Well, so I guess we'll end there, but if anybody would like, more information, please do consider signing up. We don't send a lot of stuff out, but keep people informed occasionally. And, if there's anyone interested in supporting more of this work, please, do get in contact. We have a U.S. organization with charitable status, and happy to talk more or further with any of you afterwards. So thanks again, and appreciate you coming. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I just saw a special on the herring, the eggs.
And we actually worked on that film. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And so the folks actually, they submerge some of the trees. And
Yeah.
Just pull them up. And
Exactly.
The eggs.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's totally sustainable, and it works, and it's nice because you don't often get a clear alternative to an unsustainable fishery. Usually it's like just stop it and everyone's out of work, but this one actually has this great alternative.
Is that coastal spawning unique to that area, or does that occur? I'm not familiar with that.
It pretty much starts in the Gulf of Georgia, like down near Seattle. I mean, historically it was all the way to California, but the herring stocks have been really hammered. And then it just starts to spawn all the way up into western Alaska. And so it's this amazing event. Happens really quick, only happens like 2-3 weeks of the year, and then, the gestation is like, eggs hatch in a couple of weeks, and then boom, it's all gone. Yeah.
That's really neat. I'm one of the faculty here. I do fisheries acoustics, active as well as passive, so the hydrosonic work should be interesting.
Oh, neat. Are you guys doing any acoustic work?
I do some local bay work and some coral reef stuff. So looking at fish noises and actually scallops.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can hear scallops.
Can you really? Really? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, isn't that cool? Yeah, I know. It's just the acoustic world is a fascinating one, that's for sure. Yeah.
But it's your cameras are a key thing, because acoustics is blind. We just record noise, so you don't know what's making that noise. It's tough to figure out.
Yeah, it's helping us a lot even on the little stuff like shrimp and different things. And then of course. Oh, that is mine. Yeah, thanks. I need that. Thank you. And I love the the chance of being able to film like whales and large species that you can hear underwater as well. So we're had some luck, but still working on the positioning of the cameras and different things like that.
visibility always good there, or
No.
comes and goes there?
Comes and goes for sure. Winter is good, of course, and then when there's all the greatest amount of life, it all gets all